Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start the lecture. As we see actually from the slides, we are going to discuss, or we are going to have a general introduction on carbohydrate. And what is carbohydrates? So we started with the distribution of carbohydrate in nature. That is where and where can we get carbohydrates? So naturally, carbohydrate is widely distributed in animals and plant tissues. It means that this carbohydrate can be found both in plant and animal tissues. We found this carbohydrate naturally in plants and animals. But sometimes, why in some cases, because in the olden biology, in the olden concept of biology, then the living organisms that exist on Earth is only plant and animal. Or based on the technological advancement on that time, the living organisms that we have on Earth is only plant and animal. But now currently, remember, in the modern classification of living organisms, apart from plant and animals, we also have other organisms. And these other organisms include some microorganisms. It includes microorganisms. And even remember, we have 5 kingdoms now. We have animal kingdom, we have plant kingdom, we have protista, we have fungi, and then we also have kingdom monera. So apart from plant and animals, it means that there are other organisms. So therefore, carbohydrate is found, or these carbohydrates are found in every living organisms. Every living organisms that exists on Earth have this carbohydrate. So it is just plant and animals here because in the olden day, or in the olden classification, we only have classification of plant and animals. So that is why we said it is widely distributed in nature, both in plant and animals. So it's also found in other organisms that are found on Earth. Okay. Then apart from that, then this carbohydrate is a major source of energy. Carbohydrate is a major source of energy from our diet. It produces a lot of energy, and it is actually the immediate source of energy. But ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand it's not only carbohydrate that produce energy in our body. Also, apart from carbohydrates, the other source or the other macromolecules also produce energy in our body, especially number one, lipids. Lipids in the body also produce energy. And apart from lipids, protein also produce energy in our body. Proteins also produce energy in our body. So it means that apart from carbohydrates, proteins and lipids produce energy. In fact, lipids produce energy more than carbohydrates. But protein and carbohydrates produce equal amount of energy. Like for example, in the metabolism of lipids, one 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 gram of carbohydrate can produce up to 9 kilocal of energy. So yes, 9 kilocal of energy. So in in 1 gram of carbohydrate, we can produce 9 kilocal of energy. While in the case of in the case of protein, it's only 4 kilocal. Also, in the case of protein, we only have also, so apart from, so carbohydrate also produce 4 kilocal of energy. It means that both carbohydrates and proteins produce the same amount of energy. But lipids produce energy twice, even more than that of the protein and carbohydrate. But the difference is that the carbohydrate produce the immediate energy. Once we need energy, then the first biomolecules that produce energy in our body is the carbohydrate. So unless if carbohydrate is exhausted, if carbohydrate in our body is finished, Then the next one that actually worked to produce energy is lipids. So that is why we mobilize a lot of lipids. And one thing that we should understand, ladies and gentlemen, especially during fasting, we used to become slim. Why do we become slim? Is because as we started fasting, we have carbohydrates. So when the carbohydrate is exhausted, then the next thing is to mobilize the lipids. The next thing is to mobilize the lipids. And this mobilization of lipids, it's what usually makes us to become sleep. Where did we store lipids in our body? We stored lipid one in adipocytes. We stored lipids in adipocytes. Where is adipocyte? Adipocyte is a cells that are found in the breast. So they are the breast cell. And apart from the breast, we also store it in ovary. In the ovary, we store lipid in ovary. It is also stored in testes. So these are the places where we usually store lipids. We store it in the testes and ovary. So whenever carbohydrate is exhausted, then the next biomolecules in line that will come to actually produce energy is lipids. So that is why if we are fasting, we mobilize these lipids. So as a result of that mobilization, so you are reducing the fat in your body, therefore you will be slimming. And then apart from when the lipid is also exhausted, you finish with carbohydrate, you finish with lipid, and then the next one in line is protein. So we should understand all these biomolecules produce energy except nucleic acid. Nucleic acid is not producing energy. And then now, all carbohydrates contain elements, and this element is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So these are the elements that are present in carbohydrates, and they are all in a ratio of 2:1. In fact, carbohydrates have a general formula, and this is the formula, is CH2O. This is the empirical formula of carbohydrate. And look at it here. The ratio of carbon is 1, and the ratio of hydrogen is 2, and the ratio of oxygen is 1. So ratio 1, ratio 2, ratio 1. Although it's not applied to all carbohydrates, there are some exceptions. So that is why here with the hydrogen and oxygen present in a ratio of 2:1. We should all know this. So now from this slide, there are things that we need to understand. One, where do we get this carbohydrate naturally? So we have it both in animals and plants. And remember, I told you that it's not only plant and animals that we have as an organisms. There are also other organisms like microorganisms, algae, bacteria, even archaea bacteria. They are all organisms. So these carbohydrates are also found. And also carbohydrates produce a lot of energy. And of course, carbohydrate is not the only biomolecules that produce energy in the body. Lipid also produce energy as well as the protein. So when you come to talk about lipids, that is fat and oil, I will also give you the reason why the lipid produce more energy than carbohydrate, and why is it that carbohydrate is used as the immediate source of energy in the living organisms. And then to also talk about the elements that are found in carbohydrate. So the basic elements that are found in carbohydrate are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And their ratio is usually ratio 1:2:1, but it's not applied all carbohydrates. Okay. So now What is carbohydrates? Carbohydrates, the most important thing here when we are talking about carbohydrates, the main thing that we should know is carbohydrates is defined as a fully hydroxy aldehydes, ketones, or compound that yield these on hydrolysis. This on hydrolysis. So now we need to understand what is aldehydes and ketones. So aldehydes and ketones are the carbonyl functional group. What are the carbonyl compounds? Let us start with carbonyl compound. What are carbonyl compounds? Carbonyl compounds are compounds that have carbon to oxygen double bond. So whenever you see a compound having carbon to oxygen double bond, so such kind of compound in chemistry is called carbonyl compound. Like here, look at it. We have carbon to oxygen double bond, and that is why it's considered as a carbonyl compound. Moreover, we also have another class of carbonyl compound here. Look at it. This is carbon to oxygen bond, carbon to oxygen double bond. So it's also a class of carbonyl compound. So whenever you have carbon to oxygen double bond, such compound are considered as a carbonyl compound. But we have different types of carbonyl compounds. Here, examples of this carbonyl compound, we have aldehyde, ketones. We also have amides. We also have, apart from amides, we also have carboxylic acids. They are all examples of carbonyl compound. So now, how do we differentiate aldehyde and ketone? So aldehyde and ketones, the first thing is in the
Excuse
carbonyl
me, sir.
compound, we have carbon to oxygen. So I started with actually explanation of carbonyl compound. What are the carbonyl compound? Carbonyl compound are compound that have carbon to oxygen double bond. They are the compound that have carbon to oxygen double bond, and that is carbonyl compound. And among these carbonyl compound, we have so many carbonyl compound. Examples of the carbonyl compound, we have carboxylic acid, aldehyde group, keto group or ketones. We have amides. But now I'm going to explain aldehydes, aldehydes, and ketones, because that is what we are going to discuss on carbohydrates. So what is the difference between aldehyde and ketones, or what are the aldehydes? So generally, in aldehydes, the carbonyl carbon, when we said carbonyl carbon, it means the carbon that is bearing the oxygen double bond. Like in this case, this is the carbon that is bearing the oxygen. So in aldehyde, in the case of aldehyde, it has free hydrogen. So whenever you see a carbonyl compound or carbonyl carbon, and that carbonyl carbon, it contains free hydrogen, like in this case, so that is aldehydes. And there is also another name for aldehydes. We also call it alkanal. We also call it alkanal. That is the other name for aldehyde. We also call it alkanal. And how is it differ from the others is the aldehydes or alkanal, they have one hydrogen atoms attached to the carbonyl carbon. And what is the carbonyl carbon? Carbonyl carbon is the carbon that is bearing the oxygen double bond. And then after this free hydrogen attached to the carbonyl carbon, then it has what you call alkyl group. So whenever, if you did organic chemistry, we have what you call alkyl group. And the general formula for alkyl group is CnH2n plus 1. And this n can be any number. So you see in the case of aldehydes, so it can be this R group, it can be any group of atom. But n here is a number that indicates the number of carbon atoms. So it can be any number. So now, this is the aldehyde group or alkyl group. And we have R group. So if you look at this from here, you can see that clearly this is aldehyde group. So the R, which is this one, is this group that attach to the carbonyl carbon. So from here, we said carbohydrate is defined as polyhydroxyaldehydes. So let's see here, do we have polyhydroxyaldehyde in this case? Hydroxy means OH. So whenever you see or you had the word hydroxy means OH. So poly means many. So it means that the aldehyde functional group bearing many OH group is considered as a carbohydrate. So look at it in this case, you have aldehyde functional group having two OH group. So it has polyhydroxy, that is poly OH group. So that is why this A is considered as carbohydrate. So any compound that have polyhydroxyaldehyde or keto or ketones or polyhydroxy ketones, so that compound is considered as carbohydrates. But in the case of ketones, how do we differentiate ketones from aldehydes? In the case of ketones, the carbonyl carbon, that is the carbon bearing the double bond, it has two different R groups. So we have R1 and then we have R2. We have R1 and R2. So now, in the case of ketone, we have carbonyl carbon, and the R group, we have R1 and R2. So it means that there is no free hydrogen in the case of ketone functional group. So that is why look at it, this is the carbonyl carbon, C, that is carbon to oxygen double bond, and these are the group that are attached to the carbonyl carbon. So whenever you see groups, they might not be the same. Like in this case, they are the same, CH2OH, CH2OH, they are the same. So they might not be the same because R1 and R2 may be different groups. So that is ketones. So ketones, polyhydroxy ketones, because here we have OH, we have two OH, and that is why it's considered as a polyhydroxy ketone. So carbohydrate is any compound that have this polyhydroxyaldehyde or ketones or any compound that yield this polyhydroxyaldehyde or ketones on hydrolysis. That's when you break them, and at the end, after you break them often, then you now end up having polyhydroxyaldehyde or polyhydroxy ketones. And that is why that is how we define carbohydrate. So this concept is very, very important. And then the next thing is the general formula for carbohydrates. And the general formula for carbohydrate is CN open bracket H2O, then we close bracket N, and also called as saccharides. So carbohydrates is also considered, or it's also named as saccharides. So another name for carbohydrate is saccharides. Okay. Then example for glucose. For glucose is C6H2OH, and this is the example of carbohydrates. Then another one we have sucrose. This is sucrose CnH22 C12 H22O11, and that is another example for carbohydrates. Okay, so now, ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving to the next slides. So look at it. This is polyhydroxyaldehydes. Look at it. How do we now indicate the polyhydroxyaldehyde? You see, it, hydroxy is a red in color. So look at it. We have OH in this case. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is why it's considered as a polyhydroxy. Poly means many, so many OH groups. And then aldehydes. The aldehyde, look at it, carbon to oxygen double bond and free hydrogen. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is also polyhydroxy ketones. And this is the ketones functional group. That is how we define carbohydrates and how their structures looked like. So functions. What are the functions of carbohydrates? Carbohydrate is the major sources of energy in the body. I said this. They are the one that produce most of the energy in our body. In fact, there are even some types of cell that they don't use any source or any biomolecules to produce their energy. Like, for example, brain cells and red blood cell. And that is the reason why if you are hungry, it's used to be very, very difficult for you to read and understand. It is very, very difficult for you to think because the brain cells and the red blood cells are wholly or are all depend on carbohydrate for energy. So we should all know this. Brain cells and red blood cells, they don't use any other source of energy from any other biomolecules. Rather, they use only carbohydrates, brain cells, the storage form of energy. So generally, if we take any food, after we take it and we eat and we now become fully satisfied, so we have carbohydrate. So some part of that carbohydrate will be actually converted into storage form of energy. That is, after you eat, you get energy and you provide the enough energy that you are needed. Then the next thing is that the remaining glucose that are not used for the energy will be converted into starch and glycogen. So the starch will be stored in plant until when you need the carbohydrates, then you'll now start mobilizing it. It is also applied to glycogen. Glycogen is the storage form of energy or is a storage form of sugar in our blood. Like, for example, if you are assuming now you eat excess carbohydrates, you provide glucose and the glucose is used for energy and you have remnant of the glucose. So it will be actually be transferred to the liver and convert to glycogen. And once that happens, then whenever you are hungry, then because the glucose will be depleted and you already have glycogen stored in the liver, and the liver will now start mobilizing. It will now start releasing small amount of the glucose so that at least the other body fat or the other part of the body will now use that glucose for energy. And of course, when the carbohydrate is excess, you get it and you get the enough energy that you are needed to carry out the physiological functions. And then you now have also glycogen. You actually convert some of that carbohydrate into glycogen. And after you do that, you now end of having some remnant of glucose after being used for energy and after being used for glycogen. And then the next thing is the excess carbohydrate will now also be converted into fats, that is lipids. Okay, so you now understand this slide is just trying to tell us how important carbohydrate is in our body. Yeah. So now we have glycoproteins and glycolipids are component of cell membrane and receptors. Yeah, I think if you can remember during our transportation of substances across the cell, we talk about cell membrane, where we said that in the surface of the cell membranes, we have glycogen and glycolipids. And these components are actually very, very important in cellular function as well as the receptor. Then the next now is structural basis for many organizations. Cellulose of plant, exoskeletal of insect, cell wall of microorganisms, mucopolysaccharides as round substances in higher organisms. So these are actually this. So these are the structural basis for many organisms. Like in cellulose of plant, then we have exoskeleton in insects, and then we have cell wall of microorganisms. Then we also have mucopolysaccharide as a ground substances in the organism. So now we are going to look at the classification of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are classified into four. We have monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. What is monosaccharide? Mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So it's molecules having only one actual sugar group. They cannot be further hybridized into smaller units. So those in the case of these monosaccharides, we are just talking about the how these molecules are being hydrolyzed and the hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Please, who is that? Unmute yourself.
Recording in progress.
Please, what is the problem? It's
What
like
is the
I'm just
problem?
hearing
It's like I'm just
echoing.
hearing.
Hello?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Why is this echoing
Where is
coming
this
from?
echoing coming from? From your side, sir.
It's from your side.
No, we are hearing you.
Okay, please unmute yourself.
Okay, sir.
So when two monosaccharides,
Monosaccharides.
no,
No.
let's rejoin.
Let's rejoin.
I'm disconnecting.
I'm
So
disconnecting.
let's rejoin.
So let's rejoin. Okay, sir.
The meeting is even ending in the next 3
It's
minutes.
even ending in the next 3 minutes.